She had no home, no clothes, no hope, until a silent cowboy whispered, "Stay with me forever." She hugged herself tightly, trying to keep some warmth in her body, though it seemed impossible. Her thin coat, once a cheerful shade of blue, was now faded and torn, offering little protection against the cold. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her troubles pressed her down. She had no home, no place to rest, and no one who cared to notice her struggles. She had been on her own for several months now, ever since the fire that had destroyed the small apartment she once called home. She remembered that night clearly, the sudden crackling of flames, the heat that made her eyes water, and the desperate scramble to escape with nothing but the clothes she wore. Everything else, her belongings, her memories, her sense of security, had vanished in a cloud of smoke and ash. Since then, Emma had wandered from street to street, trying to find a place where she could feel safe even for a few hours. Finding food was a daily challenge. She had learned to search through discarded boxes behind the markets, hoping to find something still edible. Sometimes kind shopkeepers would toss her leftovers, but often she was ignored. People would walk past her without a glance, some with pity in their eyes, but most with annoyance or indifference. Their footsteps seemed to echo in her mind, a constant reminder that she was invisible. Emma often found herself retreating into the small alleyways and abandoned corners of the town. There, hidden from prying eyes, she could cry freely without worrying about judgment. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks as she remembered happier times, her parents' laughter, the warmth of her childhood home, the sense of belonging she had once taken for granted. But those days were gone, swept away by the cruel hands of fate. As evening approached, the streets grew quieter. The town's lights flickered on, casting long shadows that danced across the wet pavement. Emma shivered as the chill deepened, her fingers numb and stiff. She searched desperately for shelter, but every doorway she approached either had a locked door or an angry warning to move along. The night felt endless, and the thought of facing it alone was terrifying. Then, as she turned a corner, she noticed a small general store with an old wooden awning. The paint was peeling, and the windows were foggy, but it offered some protection from the rain. Emma hurried underneath it, curling up as best as she could against the cold wood. Her body ached from exhaustion, and her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten properly for the day. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the world, but the sounds of the rain and distant town life made it impossible to find peace. It was then that she noticed a figure approaching. At first, she thought it might be someone who would shoo her away or scold her for loitering, but the man moved slowly, his steps careful and deliberate. He was tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. A long coat hung loosely around his frame, and in his hand he carried what looked like a loaf of bread. He didn't speak immediately, he simply stood a few feet away, watching her. Emma felt a flicker of fear. Who was this stranger? Why was he here? Her instincts, honed by months of mistrust, screamed at her to run, but her legs were too tired to obey. Instead, she stayed still, her eyes wide and cautious. The man finally spoke, his voice soft and calm, almost like a whisper of the wind. "Here," he said, holding out the bread. "Eat this." Slowly she reached out and took the bread, feeling the warmth of it in her hands. The simple gesture, small as it was, brought tears to her eyes. She had not felt such kindness in months, not since the world had turned its back on her. The man did not ask questions. He did not lecture or judge. He simply waited, giving her space while offering help. Emma took small bites, savoring the food as if it were a luxury from another life. Each mouthful gave her a little more strength, a little more courage. When she finished, she looked up at him, trying to find a hint of his expression beneath the shadow of his hat. There was a softness in his eyes, a quiet concern that made her heart ache with relief. Are you going to leave now?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He shook his head slightly, a small motion that said more than words could. "Not yet. Stay here," he whispered. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the street, leaving her with a sense of safety she had not known in a long time. For the first time in months, Emma felt a spark of hope. She did not know this man, this silent cowboy, but his simple act of kindness reminded her that there were still good people in the world. She settled down under the awning, wrapping herself in the thin blanket he had left, and tried to rest. The rain continued to fall, but somehow it did not feel as cold or as harsh. As the night deepened, Emma thought about the days to come. She knew life would not suddenly become easy. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear were still part of her reality, but now there was a small light guiding her, a quiet presence that promised she was not completely alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might survive, where she might even find moments of happiness again. Hours passed, and the town grew silent. Emma drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of warmth, laughter, and safety. She dreamt of a cabin by the edge of the forest, a place where she could finally rest without fear. In her dream, the silent cowboy was there, guiding her gently, offering comfort without words. She woke with the dawn, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Though her body was weak and her resources minimal, Emma made a silent promise to herself. She would survive, one day at a time. And somehow, she would repay the kindness of the man who had appeared in her darkest hour. She did not yet know his name, nor did she fully understand why he had chosen to help her, but she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone in years. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, glimmering on the wet streets. Emma stood, stretching her stiff limbs, and took a deep breath. The world was still harsh, still indifferent, but she felt a small courage blooming inside her. It was fragile, like a seedling in the wind, but it was there. And with that seed of hope, she would begin to navigate the uncertain path ahead, step by step, guided by the quiet promise of the silent cowboy who had chosen to help her when no one else would. The days that followed were not easy, but they were different. Emma woke each morning with a sense of cautious hope she had not felt in months. She thought about the silent cowboy, his calm presence, his small gestures of kindness, and the warmth of the blanket he had left her. She did not know his name, and she had not seen him since that rainy evening, but something about him made her feel safe in a world that had once seemed completely indifferent. She wandered the streets again, searching for food and small scraps of comfort. But now, there was a quiet confidence in the way she moved. The memory of the bread and the blanket reminded her that there were still people who cared, even if most did not. She began noticing small details she had ignored before: the way sunlight gleamed off puddles, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the sound of birds returning to their nests. It was as if the world, which had once seemed so cruel, had a softer side if one looked closely enough. Then, one evening, as the sky turned a pale orange with the setting sun, she saw him again. Jack, the cowboy, as she had silently named him in her mind, stood by the edge of town, near the fields that stretched beyond the last houses. He leaned against his horse, the wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. When he noticed her, he did not wave or call her over. Instead, he simply nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her presence without breaking the quiet calm that surrounded him. Emma felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. Part of her wanted to run to him, to ask why he had helped her, to thank him properly. But another part of her was wary. Trust did not come easily anymore, not after all she had endured. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach him or to stay hidden. The cowboy did not move. He waited, patient and still, as if understanding the battle inside her. Finally, Emma stepped closer, keeping her distance but letting him see her. He held out a small bundle of clothes, neatly folded and clean. Her eyes widened. She had not had proper clothing in months. The sight of warm garments, simple and practical, made her heart ache with relief. You brought these for me?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded, not speaking, but there was a kindness in his eyes that said more than words ever could. Emma took the clothes carefully, feeling the soft fabric against her worn hands. It was not just the clothing. It was the thought behind it, the understanding that someone cared about her comfort, her well-being, her survival. That night, with the new clothes tucked carefully under her arm, she found a quiet spot near the edge of town. She changed into them, feeling a small sense of dignity return with each garment. For the first time in months, she felt almost normal, almost human. She could not explain why this cowboy had chosen to help her, but she did not question it. She simply accepted it, and with acceptance came a fragile trust, one that grew quietly in the shadows of her heart. Over the next several days, Jack continued to appear in her life in small, almost unnoticed ways. He would leave food near the places she often rested, repair the broken fence near the barn where she slept, or simply stand nearby while she worked to keep herself warm and dry. He did not speak much, but his presence was enough. Emma began to learn the rhythm of his visits, the gentle patterns of his quiet care. She started to anticipate them, and each time she saw him, a little more of her fear melted away. Emma also began noticing the subtle ways he communicated. A slight tilt of his head meant she was safe. A small nod meant it was time to move. A gentle gesture toward a warm spot in the barn meant she could rest without worry. She learned to read him, just as he seemed to understand her without words. It was a strange kind of friendship, built on actions rather than conversations, but it was real, and for Emma, it was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma followed Jack to the barn he often used for his horse. It was old and worn, but it offered shelter from the wind and rain. He motioned for her to come inside, and she did, shivering as she stepped over the threshold. Inside, the air smelled of hay and wood, warm in contrast to the chill outside. He handed her a small bundle of blankets and gestured for her to rest. Emma sank to the floor gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into her tired body. As she rested, she thought about the months that had led her here. The fire, the loss, the loneliness, all of it seemed to fade for a moment in the quiet presence of the cowboy. She wondered about him, who he was, why he lived on the edge of town, why he had chosen to help her. But even without answers, she felt safe, and that was more than she had felt in a long time. The next morning, Jack was already tending to his horse when she woke. She watched him silently, noticing the care with which he brushed the animal, fed it, and adjusted its saddle. There was a simplicity to his life that fascinated her. He did not seek attention, did not demand respect, and did not expect anything in return. He simply lived quietly and helped when he could. Emma admired that, even as she marveled at how someone could be so selfless without saying a single word. Gradually, she began to open up in small ways. She told him about her journey through the town, the nights spent in alleys, the hunger and cold she had endured. She spoke in whispers at first, unsure if he wanted to hear, but he listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. Each time she shared a part of her story, a small weight lifted from her shoulders. The silent cowboy's presence made it possible to speak about pain without fear of ridicule or rejection. In turn, Emma noticed the little ways he cared for her. A cup of warm tea placed near her in the morning, a fire stoked just enough to chase away the chill, a reassuring nod when she felt uncertain. It was not grand gestures, not flashy acts of heroism. It was quiet, steady support that made all the difference. With each day, she felt her heart heal just a little more. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the fields near the town, Emma finally asked the question she had been holding back. Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Jack looked at her for a long moment, his eyes calm and steady. He did not answer with words. Instead, he simply extended his hand toward the horizon, where the sun was casting long golden rays across the fields. It was as if he were saying that action spoke louder than words, that care could be shown without explanations, and that trust could be built silently, over time. Emma understood, and for the first time she felt a connection that went beyond words. She realized that she did not need explanations to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel hope again. His presence, quiet and unwavering, was enough. As days turned into weeks, Emma's life slowly began to change. She found small ways to support herself, gathering firewood, helping with chores in exchange for meals, and learning to navigate the town with confidence. Jack remained her silent guide, showing her that survival was not just about food and shelter, but also about trust, courage, and companionship. At night, when the wind howled outside, Emma would lie beneath the blankets he had left her and think about the world she had almost given up on. She realized that even in the darkest moments, kindness could exist, and hope could be found in the most unexpected places. The silent cowboy had shown her that, and for that, she felt a gratitude deeper than words could express. With each passing day, Emma's fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild her life. She still had no permanent home, and the future remained uncertain, but she had learned something far more valuable: that even in loneliness one could find connection, and even in despair one could find hope. And it was all because of the silent cowboy who had chosen to help her, not with words but with actions and with a heart full of quiet care. The days had become longer, but in a good way. Emma no longer felt like she was merely surviving. She was beginning to live, little by little. Each morning, the sunlight felt warmer on her skin, each breath of fresh air seemed sweeter, and each step she took in the fields near the town felt lighter than the day before. She had come to look forward to Jack's quiet presence, to the reassurance his steady ways brought to her fragile world. One morning, Emma woke to the distant sound of thunder rolling across the hills. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the wind carried the first hints of rain. She dressed quickly in the clothes Jack had left her, careful to wrap herself in warmth, and stepped outside. The fields glistened with moisture from an earlier drizzle, and the faint scent of wet earth filled the air. Jack was already there, tending to his horse, brushing its coat with patient, methodical strokes. He looked up and gave her a slight nod, a silent greeting before returning to his work. Emma had learned to read Jack's movements and understand his quiet messages. When he was still, she knew it was time to rest. When he worked with focused energy, it meant the day required attention. Today, his alert posture suggested that the weather would become worse, and Emma felt a twinge of unease. She did not want to be caught in the open when the storm arrived. As the sky darkened, Jack motioned for her to follow. They walked toward the small barn at the edge of his property, the wind picking up as they went. Emma's heart raced, not from fear, but from the sense of shared purpose that came from trusting someone so completely. She realized that in just a few weeks, she had begun to rely on Jack not only for protection but also for guidance. His quiet confidence gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. By the time they reached the barn, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Jack quickly secured the doors and windows, creating a safe space from the storm outside. Emma watched as he worked, noticing how careful and deliberate he was in every movement. He had a way of doing things that made them seem effortless, yet Emma knew that every action was filled with thought and care. Once the barn was secure, Jack gestured for Emma to sit near the haystack he had prepared. She sank down, grateful for the shelter, and wrapped herself in one of the blankets. The rain pounded on the roof, loud and relentless, but inside they were safe. She looked at him, wanting to say something, but words failed her. He smiled faintly as if he understood, and that alone gave her a sense of peace. As the storm raged on, Emma shared stories of her past. She told Jack about her childhood, the fire that had taken her home, and the months she had spent wandering the town. Her voice trembled at times, but Jack never interrupted. He simply listened, his presence steady, as though absorbing her pain so that she could release it. It was a strange comfort to speak so freely to someone who said almost nothing. Yet the silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding, of trust, and of unspoken support. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of slowing. The barn shook slightly as the wind howled around them, but inside, Emma felt a warmth that was both physical and emotional. Jack moved quietly to tend the fire he had built, ensuring it burned steadily without threatening the hay around them. Emma helped when she could, fetching small bundles of wood and placing them carefully in the flames. It was the first time in months she had felt part of something larger than herself. Suddenly, the sound of rushing water reached their ears. Emma's eyes widened in alarm. She could see a small stream nearby swelling with the rain, threatening to overflow. Panic rose in her chest, but Jack remained calm. He grabbed her hand, guiding her toward higher ground outside the barn. The wind whipped around them, rain soaking through their clothes, but he never let go of her hand. Step by step, he led her to safety, his steady presence a shield against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Once they reached a safe spot on a hill, Emma collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Jack knelt beside her, checking that she was unharmed. She looked at him, eyes wide with gratitude and awe. You saved me," she said, her voice choked with emotion. He simply nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet certainty that he would be there, no matter what. Emma realized that this was the kind of trust and care she had been missing in her life. Not words or promises, but actions that proved someone truly cared. In the days that followed the storm, Emma and Jack worked together to repair the barn and reinforce the surrounding area. They cleared debris, built small barriers to prevent future flooding, and ensured that the space remained safe and comfortable. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. For the first time in her life, Emma felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment. She realized that survival was not just about enduring hardship, it was about taking action, creating stability and caring for oneself and others. During this time, Emma also began to notice subtle changes within herself. She felt stronger, more capable, and more confident. She laughed more easily, even if softly, and smiled without feeling guilty. She began to take pride in small achievements: a fire built without help, a meal prepared from scavenged ingredients, a pathway cleared in the barn. Each success, no matter how minor, added to her growing sense of self-worth. Jack, ever silent, seemed to notice these changes. He did not comment or draw attention to them, but his eyes held a quiet approval, a recognition of her growth. Emma felt encouraged by his presence, realizing that she did not need constant praise to know she was making progress. His quiet support was enough to fuel her determination. One afternoon, while they were tending to the barn together, Emma asked Jack a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why? Why do you care about me?" she asked, her voice tentative. Jack paused, brushing a strand of hair from his face. He looked at her, eyes steady and calm, and simply placed his hand gently on hers. No words came, but the gesture spoke volumes. It was a promise of safety, a declaration of trust, and an unspoken bond that transcended speech. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, a deep sense of connection that she had not experienced in years. The following weeks brought both challenges and quiet triumphs. Emma continued to rebuild her life, learning new skills and adapting to the routines of the countryside. She tended small gardens, helped with chores, and took care of the barn and animals. Jack guided her when necessary, but he also allowed her space to learn, to make mistakes, and to grow independently. Their partnership became a delicate balance of support and autonomy, each respecting the other's strengths and boundaries. Through it all, Emma's feelings for Jack deepened. She admired his patience, his humility, and his unwavering presence. She realized that she trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. There was no need for grand declarations of love or affection. Their connection was built on understanding, respect, and the simple act of being there for one another. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Emma and Jack sat outside the barn, watching the sky change colors. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of wet earth and grass. Emma rested her head on her knees, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. Jack sat nearby, quietly watching over her, his hat tilted to shield his eyes from the fading light. For the first time in months, Emma felt truly safe, not just from physical harm, but from the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so long. She realized that life could be beautiful again, that hope could exist even after immense loss. And she understood that it was because of Jack, the silent cowboy whose actions had spoken louder than words ever could, that she had found the courage to trust, to hope, and to begin living once more. As night fell, they returned to the barn, settling in for the evening. The fire burned steadily, casting warm light across the wooden walls. Emma wrapped herself in a blanket, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She had come from a place of despair, of loneliness, of hopelessness. And yet, through small acts of kindness, patience, and trust, she had discovered a new beginning. Jack, ever silent, watched over her as she drifted to sleep. There were no promises made, no words of love spoken, but the bond between them had grown stronger than any spoken vow. Emma knew that as long as he was there, she would never be truly alone again. And for the first time in her life, she felt a quiet joy, a deep sense of belonging, and a hope for the future that felt real and attainable. The days had grown longer, and the rhythm of life had settled into something steady and comforting for Emma. She no longer felt the gnawing fear that had accompanied her for so many months. Her body was stronger, her spirit more resilient, and her heart more open to the small joys that life offered. Each morning she awoke with a quiet anticipation, ready to face the day alongside Jack, who remained as constant and silent as ever. Their routine had become simple but meaningful. Together, they worked on the land near the barn, tending to the small vegetable garden Jack had cultivated, repairing fences and caring for his horse. Emma had grown skilled at tasks she had never imagined doing before. She learned to feed the animals correctly, mend broken boards, and even start a fire without help. Jack would offer gentle guidance when needed, but he trusted her to learn and to grow at her own pace. It was a form of respect that Emma had never experienced before, and it made her feel valued and capable. One afternoon, as they were repairing a section of the fence near the far edge of the property, Emma paused to catch her breath. She looked at Jack, watching how effortlessly he worked, his calm focus never wavering even under the hot sun. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, silent, patient, and steady. She realized that she had begun to rely on him in more ways than one, not just for protection or guidance, but for the quiet reassurance that he offered simply by being there. "Jack," she said softly, almost hesitantly, "do you ever get tired of being alone?" He did not answer immediately, but his eyes held a depth of thought that spoke volumes. After a moment, he simply shook his head slightly, as if to say that being alone was not a burden but a choice, and that the presence of someone trustworthy made all the difference. Emma nodded, understanding more than words could convey. That evening, after their work was done, they sat outside the barn watching the sunset. The sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange, pink, and gold, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of nature. Emma felt a warmth in her chest that she had never felt before. The fears and uncertainties that had haunted her for so long seemed to fade with the day's fading light. As the stars began to appear, Jack finally spoke a few words that Emma had longed to hear. "Stay with me," he said quietly, his voice soft but filled with a steady determination. "Forever, if you want." She looked at him, seeing not just a silent protector, but a companion who had been by her side through her darkest hours and had helped her find her way back to life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with certainty. "I want to stay." She no longer feared the coming nights or the uncertainties of each day. With Jack by her side, she felt a sense of security and peace that made everything seem possible. Together, they built a home in the barn, making small improvements and adding personal touches that reflected their shared life. Blankets were neatly folded, a fire burned steadily in the hearth, and the garden flourished under their care. Each small act of building and tending was a step toward creating a life that felt stable, welcoming, and full of promise. Emma also began to notice the subtle ways Jack showed care and affection. He would leave small gifts, like a freshly baked loaf of bread or a bundle of wildflowers, placed carefully where she would find them. He learned to anticipate her needs without her having to ask, and she learned to trust him completely. Their connection was built not on grand gestures, but on quiet acts of thoughtfulness and consistent support. Emma realized that love, true love, could exist in silence and simplicity, just as much as it could in words or dramatic declarations. As the seasons changed, Emma found herself thriving. The garden produced more than enough vegetables for them to eat, and she learned to prepare simple meals that brought comfort and satisfaction. She mended her own clothes and even helped Jack maintain his horse and the barn. Every task she completed strengthened her confidence, and she began to see herself not as someone who had lost everything, but as someone who had found a new life filled with purpose, connection, and hope. One particularly quiet evening, as they sat on the porch of the barn watching the moon rise over the hills, Emma reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the months of fear, hunger, and despair she had endured, and she marveled at the resilience she had discovered within herself. But more than anything, she felt gratitude for the kindness that had been offered to her, for the trust she had learned to give, and for the silent cowboy who had guided her through the storm. "You've changed my life, Jack," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, eyes calm and steady, and gave a small nod. He did not speak, but the expression on his face conveyed everything she needed to know, that he had been there for her, that he cared deeply, and that he had always believed in her strength, even when she had doubted herself. Life settled into a gentle, comforting rhythm. Days were filled with work and small joys, nights with quiet conversation or shared silence by the fire. Emma found happiness not in wealth or possessions, but in the feeling of belonging, of being seen and valued, and of sharing her life with someone who had proven himself trustworthy in every way. Jack, in turn, found companionship in Emma's presence, and he no longer felt the emptiness that had once been part of his solitary life. Together, they created a bond that was steady, enduring, and full of quiet love. Emma also began to dream about the future. She imagined a life where she could continue to grow, to learn, and to build a home filled with warmth and laughter. She thought about helping others who were struggling, just as she had been helped. And she realized that the kindness she had received from Jack was a gift she could carry forward, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could flourish if one had the courage to accept it. One crisp morning, as the first snow of winter fell gently on the fields, Emma and Jack worked together to prepare the barn and garden for the cold season. Snowflakes settled on their hair and shoulders, but the warmth of the fire and their shared effort kept the chill at bay. Emma paused for a moment, looking at Jack as he adjusted a bundle of wood. She felt a profound sense of contentment, a quiet happiness that came from knowing she was safe, loved, and valued. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma took Jack's hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of months of struggle, growth, and trust. She realized that life had given her a second chance, not just at survival, but at love and companionship. And it was because of the silent cowboy who had chosen to help her, not with words, but with consistent care and unwavering presence, that she had discovered the strength to embrace this new beginning. As the weeks turned into months, Emma's confidence continued to grow. She learned to ride Jack's horse, explore the surrounding fields, and even help him with small repairs around the property. Their partnership became one of mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose. Emma felt proud of herself, not just for surviving, but for thriving in a life she had never imagined possible. On a quiet evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma leaned against Jack's shoulder. He did not speak, but he placed a protective arm around her, a silent promise that he would always be there. For Emma, that simple gesture meant more than words ever could. It was a testament to the bond they had built, a bond forged through trust, patience, and quiet acts of love. In that moment, Emma realized that she had truly found a home, not in a building or a place, but in the presence of someone who cared for her deeply. She had found hope, courage, and a sense of belonging that she had once thought impossible. And she knew that together, she and Jack could face whatever the future held, because they had already weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and had emerged stronger for it. The nights grew cold, but the warmth of their shared life made the chill almost imperceptible. Emma wrapped herself in the blanket they shared, feeling the steady rhythm of Jack's breathing beside her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. She had no fear of the future, no lingering doubts about her worth. She had found love, trust, and safety in the most unexpected way, and it was a gift she would treasure forever. With each passing day, their life together became more complete. Emma and Jack worked side by side, laughed quietly, and shared the simple joys of living in harmony with the land and each other. She knew that challenges would still come, as life was never without them, but she also knew that together they could face anything. The silent cowboy who had once offered her a loaf of bread and a blanket had become her protector, companion, and heart's anchor. And as Emma drifted off to sleep that night, with Jack quietly beside her, she knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along: a place to belong, a heart to trust, and a life full of hope, love, and quiet happiness.